So in the validation, some more important points are there. Let's take a look about that. How we can configure the form validations and work with the form validations. So generally, when we are dealing with the Angular forms, working with Angular forms and dealing with Angular forms, I showed you the validation services. So this is the example, and in the validation services, we learned about, so project is Amazon. We learned how to configure the validation error messages and display them. But one important point we need to know is, for every control, ready-made validations are not possible. For example, suppose for a text box, so we can give required, so that it will not allow empty. So there must be some value. But if I am writing a drop down, so in that we have some options, and in that, suppose we given select city, and we have some city names and all. And if user is not selecting a city, then we have to define, please select a city. But all are options only. And for this, you cannot give required. Required is not suitable for this. Required is okay. Required is okay for your input control, but required is not okay for select. If it is not okay, then what we have to do is, we have to learn how to write custom validations. Custom validations. Custom validations is nothing but we can write our own validations and configure the validations. We can define our own validations and define the validations. Because predefined validations are not supported. If predefined validations are not supported, obviously we have to write our own validation. That is generally custom validation. So let's see one example how the custom validations are written, how we can handle the custom validation. In yesterday's example, so we created two text boxes, username and mobile. And here I will add one more data term. And here we say your city. And here we are using a data definition and select. And I will give this select to display some options. So it have option. Option is select a city. And other options we have like Delhi. So another option like Hyderabad. Like this, we have options configured inside it. Now here, if user is not selecting the city, that means if user selects the first option, then we need to display a message. So we will put a data definition, and here we will put a div, and here we will put a message saying that please select a city. So please select your city. So that is the message to display. Let's keep this class text danger. Okay. So this is the control which will not allow you to use anything like suppose required. You cannot use required here. It will not work. So that means now how we will identify whether the user selected the first option or other options, how to know about them. So such type validations we have to write manually. So that is what we call as custom validation. So how we write manually the custom validation? You see here in the select, we are defining. In the select, we are configuring. First options. Every option will have a value. The value for first one, I will give as no city. That means it's not any city. So that means if user selects first option, that means it's not a city. And user selects the second one, so value. So then it will submit Delhi. If user selects the value second, that is submits Hyderabad. But if user selects first one, that means no city selected. No city selected. Now what we have to do is we have to verify. We need to configure the validations for that. Define the validations for that. Configuring and defining the validations for that. How to do that? So that means when user is selecting a city, we need to write a logic for this. Let's go to validation TS file. Here in the TS file, so I will create a property here. The property is selected city. It is an any type. So by default, selected city contains an option. This option we will give select a city. That means it contains select a city. And we need to bind this. We need to bind this with that drop down. So with the drop down, we are binding that by using ng model. Ng model is equal to, so here we say selected city. Selected city. That means whatever the city selected, it will be stored there. It will be stored there. Initially, we are displaying that. Let's run this and see. So we are accessing the details and displaying. Yeah. So let's run this and see in the local host. Yeah. Yeah. And this is the home page and the validations here. So the validation, this selected city, and here in the validation component, it is an any type of value. So some error here. So related to, so what is that? The objects error is there. Okay. Let's check the problem here. Yeah. That selected city is the problem. Let's go into this. The component file here we have so selected city, and it is a property, and we need to bind that selected city property there. Selected city property there. So this is not having any value by default. That means it is not having any value by default. So here selected city is having select a city. So that is the select a city property we define. Suppose if it is empty, that means no property value is configured inside it. So if it is empty, that means no value is configured inside it. And I go into the validation part. So it goes here. it is already showing a message, please select a city. When I select any city, it should hide. If I select the first one, then it should not. It should not. So that means it should display this message. I don't want this message to display by default. Based on the selection, we need to display that value. So here we have to first access that city value. That means we need to write a method on city change. On city change. So we need to verify which value they selected. And on one more option, display city error, we will set it to false. That is a Boolean value. Display city error is false. Now, display city error is false. So here, selected city is also empty. Empty. Display city error is false. Now here, I will apply to this div. Div is ng if. So by using ng if, we are using, so display city error. So display city error, that is the property we are binding. Display city error is the property we are binding. So by default, it is false. Then city error will not be shown. You can see that city error is not displayed here. Now, one more option is, so here by default, it should display select a city. Select a city. So by default, it should display select a city or some value it should display. So, and this select a city must be binded to that drop down. So to this drop down, we have to bind that. So, but the value you see here, it's having the value no city. Now what happens is when user is changing this, we need to get the value, selected city value. Selected city value must be accessed when user is changing. So for change, we return on city change function. We will bind that. We have to write change. Change is equal to on city change. On city change is the method to fire up on city change. On city change, we have to collect the city name and a display. So here I will just put an alert first for confirmation. This dot selected city. I'm accessing the selected city. And observe here, it is showing a value. I'm selecting a city here. So it displays select a city. By default, it is showing that value. It is showing that value. It is not accessing that city. By default, it is having that. That means this property, selected city, is a property. So which need to be binded with that so that we can access the value. Access the value. So what I will do here is I will create one property to bind the value with it. One property to bind the value with it so that we can access the value. So the property is nothing but, so first we will configure a property here. So the property is selected city name. So by default, the selected city name is empty. That means nothing is configured. We need to bind to this drop down here. So to the drop down, if I want to bind, we have to use a two-way binding technique, ng model. And here we have to define selected city name. Selected city name. That is usually binded with that. So selected city name is binded. And if you are keeping some value into this, that means some text we need to pass into it and access that here. So here we are defining the alert this dot selected city name, this dot selected city name on alert on change. That means when user changes this, user changes that city name must be accessed and displayed. So which city user is selecting, we need to collect it and access. So to do that, already we have on change event written, and by default display error is not there. Display error is not there. And form is submitting the data, it is disabling the form options and all. What I will do is, here we will collect the data from the form, and we will send the data. That means when user changes the city, we have to collect the city name and display. And here on form submit also we can handle that. You have to decide on which event it need to on which event it need to verify the data, on which event it need to verify the data. On submit you want to verify, or on change you have to verify. We have to decide that. So because if you want to collect on submit and verify, then usually you have to write on submit. On submit we have to verify the value, get the value, and display the value. And if you want to configure on the change immediately, then you have to write on the change event directly. On the change event directly, we can send the value of that particular element and configure that. So how you do, this is two-way binding technique. Without two-way binding technique, because all above options, we are not using two-way binding technique. Generally what we do is, here we write so simple option like this. What is that? So we have to define, so ng model, it makes it a model. After that, we need to define a name. We need to configure a name for this. Name is, I will give the name as city, or say selected city. Selected city is the name. That means the reference name we configured, hash. So selected city, or I will put just city. And hash city is equal to ng model. So we are configuring that. I need to send this value, city value, on change. On change, we need to send the city value. That means we will put city dot value. It will send the city value. And what you have to do is, here we don't need this anymore. We need to just collect that. So city. So city is an any type. We have to collect that city and display. That means this dot city, whatever the value submitted, so that will be displayed here. Just city must be displayed here. That is the parameter. That means what happens now when user is changing the city. So selecting the city name will come Delhi, the city name will come Hyderabad, and the city will come like no city. Now you know that if we can send the value, then we can simply verify that here. So simple condition we can write, if city is equal to no city, then display city error, display this dot display city error should be true. Otherwise this dot display city error should be false. That is the technique we have to follow. Two-way binding we can use when you want to handle on submit. Here we need to verify just while typing itself. So in that case, while selecting itself, you can see now, I click here and select Delhi. So that is okay, no problem. Hyderabad, no problem. But when I select a city, then automatically it will display that message. Please select your city. And I choose any city. Now it will be hidden. These of validations we have to manually write. Technically manually write. So this is what we have to define. Yeah. right? So technically, this is how we are managing and we are configuring. So we will remove this. Who is this? These some buffoons, some people who are disturbing the class. We will remove them from the class. Huh? Yeah, fine. Okay, so this is basically how we are managing, right? Now, the point here is everything is not configured just by using the configuration of predefined validations. We have to create our own validations also. We have to configure our own validations. For that, we need custom validation. Custom validation is not only for this reason. So generally, custom validation is also used for various other occasions also. So custom validation is used for any another purpose also. The purpose is nothing but generally custom validation requires. Suppose I will give you another example. Suppose we said you see websites. Usually many websites websites will ask for entering some codes. So like to verify you are a human or a robot, so to check them, they will ask some calculations, they ask some result, they will say that some this plus this how much, enter that number, like that some confirmations will happen. Based on that they validate. Those are all custom validations. That means, for example, we ask here enter an even number, even number, even number, and we defined here a text box. So input type is equal to text. Input type is equal to text. And for that name I given as, suppose name I given as, so even. And here we defined as, suppose even is equal to ng model. And first we need to configure as model. So ng model. Okay. And usually now we have to verify and display the message. We have to verify and display the message. So verifying and displaying the message is nothing but usually when you are verifying and displaying the message, we have to check whether the number entered is a even number or not. To check whether it is an even number or not, you need to do a lot of calculation. You cannot write any pattern, or there is no ready-made option for that. You have to write the functions. Then usually what we need to do is, so we will put a message here. So I will put a data definition. So data definition, and here I will write a div and say not an even number, not an even number. Now I will put here class as text danger, right? So that is basically how we are configuring. So here now we have to display the message. So for this even number, and we have to do that when they finish it typing. In that case, what you can do is, so we can put another property here. So let's create another property, that is display even error. Display even error, this is also false. And you see in the form, by default, it is displaying that number. So I don't want to show it until or unless they type. Then we can attach this. So by using ngIf, we can attach that here as display even error. Display even error. By default, it is false. It is not showing it. When they finish it typing the number and come out, that means what we have to do, we have to write a blur event. In JavaScript, you know, we have on even blur. On even blur. That means, so on even blur. So we have to collect the value they entered. That means I will collect the value. So value any type. We will collect the value they entered inside the text box when it is blur. So that means we have to write the blur event for this. So for the text box, we have to write the blur event. Blur event. On blur, so we have to write on even blur. On even blur, we need to send this even dot value. It will send the value entered inside the text box. We have to collect the value. We have to collect the value and verify. So you know how to verify the even number. That means what we have to do is we have to write a condition. If value is equal to, if value is how to check the even number, modulus division. If modulus division and equal to modulus division, so modulus division by which number we have to configure? Modulus division by 2 and is equal to 0. That is the conditions we have to write. That means usually the value is divided by 2 and is it result is 0. That means modulus remainder value is 0. Remainder value is 0, then it is an even number. Then what we do? So this dot display even error, we will set it to false. Otherwise we will say this dot display even error to true, like this. That means we are verifying that. But here one more important is converting the values, managing the values is also important. That means, for example, now see here. So we are writing here the number. Suppose I entered 3, then it says not an even number. And I entered some 8, then it is okay. I entered some 9, then it says not an even number. So I said some 2, then it is okay. So such validations we have to write manually. And when the value is not a string, you have to convert into numbers, parsing techniques. These are all basically required for configuring and dealing with validations. Configuring and dealing with validation require all these options. So this is what we call as custom validation. So this is while configuring the validations, ready-made validation services, you can use them. If those ready-made validations are not enough, then you have to write your own validations and configure them. Our own validations we need to configure. Next important, after understanding the validations, after configuring and understanding the validations, so we need to know about, so one more option is in the forms, Angular forms, we have two types of forms. What you have seen now is called as template driven form. Template driven form. What is good, what is bad about template driven form? The good and bad about template driven form is nothing but actually template driven form, the configuration and manipulation so happens in UI. The configuration and manipulation happens in UI. That means in the user interface. In the user interface, the configuration and manipulation, everything happens. The configuration and manipulation, everything happens in UI. You have seen this. What will happen is everything is designed in user interface. And due to that, what happens is this UI becomes very complicated. User interface. Actually, in the user interface, we expect general basic HTML presentations. But here, lot of dynamic logics are written. Due to this, user interface becomes heavy. It becomes heavy on user interface. that becomes slow in rendering. Slow in rendering. So, and another point is it is difficult. Difficult. That means you can say it is hard. It is hard for extending. For extending. That means if I want to extending, if I want to extend the functionality. So if I want to extend the functionality, if you want to extend the functionality, that means extending the functionality, then extending will be very difficult in the UI. So if it is in the code level, then that means in the controller level, extension will be easy. But if everything is in the UI, extension will be hard. Not only that, so hard for testing also. It is not good for testing. But very important is this kind is good. It is good. It is good for you component. Good for component that doesn't require extensions. Extensions. So that doesn't require extensions. And so that is handling simple so form interactions, simple form interactions. This is good. And it is good for inline technique, inline documentation technique. I told you inline documentation technique means everything is designed in one page. So if you are using an inline technique, and then this kind of forms are good. This kind of forms are good. Template driven forms are good. So those forms are good. Template driven forms are good. So the point here is then what is solution? How we can make a little better forms so that we can make the UI clean. We can make the UI little bit lightweight so that it can be easily extended. For that, we have another concept called reactive forms. Reactive forms, or people also call as model-driven forms. Model-driven forms. In Angular, we have reactive forms and model-driven forms. What is difference between the template-driven and model-driven forms? The difference between the template-driven and model-driven. So one of the main advantage of reactive form is, so the entire forms are configured. Forms are configured in controller level. They are configured in controller level. That means there will be less burden on UI. It will be fast in rendering. So fast in rendering. So forms are configured at controller level. If forms are configured at controller level, less burden on UI. That means you will have a clean separation of UI, and logic. That will be very easy for extending, and it will be very easy for testing. That is the reason, if you want a form, suppose you are creating a login form. So login form contains simple username, password. We don't need regular extensions inside it. In that case, we better go with the first one, template driven form we will create, and we handle that. But I want something like registration form. In this registration form, some new fields will be added, some will be removed. So that means according to the situation, they will be changing. Suppose people registering from India, it will show one form. For people registering from out of India, that means from other countries, for them, some more fields must be added and shown. That means the form will change according to situation. In that case, so reactive forms are better. Now, how to create reactive forms and how to use the reactive forms is also important. That makes your UI very much clean. I will show you how we can manage that. So for that, we have several techniques. We have a form builder. We have a form builder. Form builder is a service. It is a service. By using this form builder service, technically by using the form builder service, by using the form builder service, we can verify, we can design a form in such a way that all the logic will be in the controller, only presentation will be in the UI, and it makes the forms lightweight, it makes the performance better, and it is easy for extensions. By using this form builder service, you can configure forms, how the form builder service is used, and you can easily handle the validation with the forms also. Let's see how we can use the reactive forms and configure the reactive form. The main intention of reactive form is to reduce burden on the UI and keep the UI more simplified and keep the UI more cleaner, so that it will reduce the burden on it. Let's see how we can handle reactive forms, how we can create the reactive forms and validate the reactive forms. For that, actually, we need some important modules. We need some important modules, and we need to configure those modules. So we need, so a form builder. First, we need a form builder, and we need validators. Validators is a class. By using the form builder and validators class, we can easily configure the forms and handle the form. Actually, we need form builder, validators, and to create form, we need a form group. By using form group, you can create the form. Let's see how to design a form and configure the form by using a reactive approach. See the difference now. You see, this form that we created contains lot of user interface logic. UI is very complicated. It doesn't looks like ordinary HTML. It looks lot of complicated with lot of ngIfs, conditions, and everything. So let's create a simple approach now. Means let's create the reactive approach. I will create a new component, ng generate component. I will give the component name as a reactive demo. Okay, skip this. So we have reactive demo. That is the component we have, reactive demo. Now let's design this reactive demo. So for that, so we need to go to reactive demo component.ts. In this, and I will keep this in the startup first. So let's go to the app module. In the app module, so we will configure here reactive demo, and in the index page, I will start with reactive demo. Yeah, and you see the reactive demo is working fine. Okay, let's go to the reactive demo ts file here. So we need to configure, we need to import some important options. We have to import from Angular forms, from Angular forms. From Angular forms, we have to import some classes. Once we need a form builder. So provides the service, and we need a form group. It is used to create a form, and validators. So that is validators is providing the validations for the form. We need to import all this. Now we need to configure a form. So what we will do is how to design a form. First, I will use FRM register. It is a form. Forms are configured by using form group. That means it is of type form group. That means the form is of form group type. So we have to configure that as a form group type. That means it is the type form group. We have to define in this way, form group. So we need to define the form group. So that is nothing but configuring a form and defining a form. So this is basically form group. So it says you don't have any initializer. There is no initializer. So that means it is not initialized. We will initialize later. Actually, it can be form group, or it can be any type. You can configure like that, form group or any type, because if you are not defining any initializer, you can configure as any type, or you can configure as undefined type. That is depending on the requirements. So this is a form group. We can configure that any type. Here we are specifying it. Now, the next point, that means it is a form. FRM register is a form. And we need a form builder service to use to create the form. We need to inject the form builder into constructor, private, FB. So it is form builder type. It is form builder. Okay. Now we need to create a form. How we can configure the form? Generally configuring the form. So we can declare like this, or directly we can create FRM register. Initially, this FRM register is defined as any type. FRM register is defined as any type. Then what you can do is, here on the initialization, we can create the form now. That means designing the form in the controller level itself, configuring the form in the controller level itself. In the controller level, what I am doing here is I am simply using this dot FRM register. FRM register. It will be a form. That means this dot FB dot group. It is used to create a form. So that means it is creating a form. In that form group, it can have controls. That means group is a method which is used to design a form. That means now this FRM register is representing a form. It is representing a form. Form group is configured for form. Now inside that, you can have controls. Inside the form group, it contains controls. What controls you want? I want username control. Okay. And what should be the properties for that username? Username initially empty. Okay. What validations you want to give for username? Everything you design in the controller level. I want the validations. That means we need to write an array, because validations are collection of validations. So many validations can be there. We have to write validators. By using validators, we can access required. That is required error. Another, so I will put here validators. By using validators dot, I defined min length. So min length, so we have ready made. So here we have 4. That means you are configuring the form, you are configuring the control and its validations, everything in the code level. Everything in the code level. Now your UI looks very clean. You don't need to write any validation in the user interface. Everything is configured here. Similarly, what else you want in your form? You have to define that. So I want some mobile. So I configured mobile. Mobile also initially empty. At validators. Validators is nothing but mobile is also required. And in the validators, mobile uses a pattern. And you know how to write the patterns. Patterns are written in double slash. You know that. In the double slash, I will say slash plus 91 and 0-9 and 10 digits number. That's how we write the pattern. So that is how we configured. Suppose I want email, then how you configure that email field? Empty, initially value is empty, and it is using validators. Validators dot required, that means email also required. And validators dot, we have a separate email validation. All HTML validations are configured in this way. So that is how we are configuring and defining. So this is designing a form and its validations, everything inside the controller only. And you want to verify on form submit. I want to display the errors and show the errors when form is submitted. So I will create a property here, submitted. Submitted by default is false. When form is submitted, we will turn it to true and we will verify that. Now you see here, so we are creating FRM register, and that is nothing but a form. Form is designed as a form group. In that we will have controls. In the controls, you can define the values, you can define the validations and everything here. Once you configure this, now we need to access that username, mobile, and email from a form. Then to access from a form, so much lengthy process will be there. Because what we have to do, we have to write like this. First, we have to access FRM register. In that FRM register, so we have to access controls. In the controls, we have to access so that username. This lengthy reference will be there. To avoid this lengthy reference and use in a short way, what you can do is you can create accessors. Let's create an accessor. Get accessor, so form. So I will give FRM. What this accessor should return? So this should return, so this dot FRM register dot controls. So that means it should return the controls. Whatever the controls present in the form, it should return so that I can easily access with FRM. So it's not necessary, but it is easy. It is good. Okay. Now we will write on submit here. That means we will write an event on submit. On submit, what to do? On submit, so this dot submitted will be set to true, set to true. And we will verify FRM register is valid or not. And if it is invalid, return all the errors. That means what will happen is if this dot FRM register dot invalid, that means the form is invalid. Then return means stop and show the errors. If it is valid, then put an alert saying that registered successfully. This is how we designed a form. And observe here, everything we configured inside the logic level. That means inside the controller. Now go to your UI. In the UI, that is HTML. In the HTML, how we design a form. So let's create a form here. I will put a heading as register user. I am using register user and class container fluid. Yeah. Below this, we will design a form. That means we need to configure a form. And this form should bind with the form group you created. We have to just use a property form group. And this form group property, it should be FRM register. But why this form group is not available? Because in the app module, so we have to import reactive form module also. That means we already have a form module. We have to import reactive form module. Reactive forms module also we have to import. Form module is for general template driven forms. For reactive forms, we need reactive form module. Now, once you added that reactive form module, so now you see here, so we have, so the option, the form group is available. The form group should refer FRM register. It should refer the FRM register. That is referring the form. And on submit, you can use on submit, or you can use now ng submit, which is submitting the form. On ng submit, so we have to write on submit method. So on submit method, we have to access. That is the on submit method we have to access. So on submit method we need to access. And that is on submit we have to access that. Ng submit indicates access that on submit. We need to access that on submit. So that is the method we need to configure. So submit, okay, that is the option we need to configure. Now, inside the form is ready. Inside the form, we need username. So let's create a data list with a data term. So username. For that, we need a text box. Data definition input type is equal to text. Earlier, we have to do a lot of work here. We need a name, we need a model, we need a ng model reference. So we need to write all the validations and all. But now it's very simple. Just we have to use a property, form control name. We have to use form control name is equal to, it should refer to which control? It should refer to the control. The referring to the control is nothing but username. It should refer to username. That's it. Now you don't need to write the validations also. You don't need to configure the validations. You don't need to write the validation. That's it. But error messages you have to write. Suppose I want to show error messages. So if I want to show error messages, then we have to get the error messages and display. So that means what we need to do, we will write it. We will write here. Error messages is same. Only the point is, so here error message is same, but here you don't need any model binding. You don't need any validations to write. Everything is configured at controller level. What message to show you have to write. So here I will use like this must be displayed. So ng if I am writing here ng if condition. Condition is nothing but, so if the form is submitted, that means submitted is true. If submitted is true and submitted is true, that means form is submitted. And frm dot username is having errors. So it is having errors. frm dot username is having errors. So then what to do? That means it is submitted and it is having errors. So we need to display the message. That means we need to put a span. We need to put a span here. And the span contains, one is username required. And another span is so name too short. This we need to do. And here we need to write ng if. Here we need to access the form. So frm dot username dot errors is an object, and errors dot which error. If it is a required error, then it will display that message. And similarly, if the error is min length error, it will display this one. That means if it is a min length error, it is displaying min length. So then it is displaying. So that means the point here is your controls are very much clean. Messages you have to display. Without writing messages, they can't display, right? Your control is very clean. That means earlier, when we designed the same in validation component, observe, when we designed the same in our general validation component, in the validation component, your text box contains a name, it contains a model, it contains a username reference, it contains required, it contains min length, very lengthy. Now you don't need to do all that. So now this looks more simple. That looks more simple. All the validations and every configuration so is defined. All the validations and every configuration is defined at the controller level. Here we need to just mention this. And suppose now the form is having a button. So register, it is a submit button. Like that, we need to design for every control. For every control, we have to define, and for every control, we need to manage that. For every control, we need to configure, define, and manage this. So I just given for one control and I defined for one control. And you see in the form here. So when I click on register, that fires up. That message fires up and display. And suppose we will put a color here as the class. Yeah. Let's put the class as text danger. And you can see now, initially, it is not showing any message. And the form is submitted. It will fire up the message. And I am typing some name. It says name too short. Now it's okay. That looks good. The same form you have designed, the same form you have designed. Only the difference is this time we used here a reactive approach. In real world projects, some majority of the situations, if your forms are changing regularly, they are having some new fields coming in. So some changes in the validations are happening. Then you have to go with this approach because you cannot change the UI every time. So logic you can easily extend. That is the reason here we designed a form. We designed the controls in the form. We defined the validations for those controls. You have to just bind them to your UI. So you don't need to write any much logic much inside it. However, presenting the error messages you have to do. Of course, you have to do, because what message to show you have to write it, configure it. Similarly, now all other options we need to manage. All other options. That means suppose now another control. Another control is mobile. And for mobile data definition, input type is equal to text. And here simply form control name is equal to mobile. That's it. And the errors we have to put the same. If it is submitted and it is having errors, one is required. So this is frm.mobile.errors. So mobile.errors. And this is for mobile errors. I'm changing it. And if the mobile error, so mobile error, and you know that mobile have required error, mobile have a pattern error. If it is a pattern error, so say here mobile required, and here you say invalid mobile. Like this we need to configure. So that is how we write the validation. So this is for, so the mobile field we defined. And we have the two options now, the name and mobile. And you click on that, it says name required, mobile required. So name is name too short and entered. And mobile is successful. You see, click on register, it's not submitting anything. Register is not working, it's not submitting until I entered the mobile number and correctly configured the mobile number. Now click register, then it has to fire up and display. But for that, we haven't written any logic. That means posting to API and all, we have to write the logic for that. Initially, the point here is, it will not, of course, yesterday I showed you, we can disable the forms, we can configure the forms and all. The same thing we have to write for another email field also. That means we need to define a data term and email, and we need a data definition, and we have input type is equal to text, and we have a form control name is email. And similarly, the errors for that will be the errors will be for email errors. And here email also required, and email have another option, that is email required. And here email have a email error. So email error also we can have. That means here we are writing email required, and here we are writing invalid email. We are defining invalid email. So these are the validations. And you see now, so another option is there, and email also required. So name entered, so and mobile entered. So mobile entered, and email, I'm entering some, it says invalid email. So, and I entered gmail.com. Now it is okay. Anything is not configured correctly, it says invalid email. I said @, now it is fine. This is generally how the validations are configured. So now you see registered successfully. That means it submits successfully. And you have a problem inside this, and click on register, it's not working. That means any field have problem, register is not working. If there is no problem and everything is fine, now it submits registered successfully. On that, we will send the data to API and we configure that. This is good approach. So many times people ask like, which one is best? There is nothing like which one is best, depending on situation. That means you are designing a form that doesn't require regular extensions, regular extensions, or that doesn't require generally changes in the fields. So static every time have the same functionality, then you can go with template driven forms. If there are regular extensions required, you want your UI clean, because you see your UI is more cleaner than previous. Only the error messages we are displaying here, because of course we need to show the messages, but data binding is very simple. We need to just design a form, bind the form and controls. This is actually service, a form builder service. By using the form builder service, we can configure the reactive forms and validate the reactive forms. That makes the performance more better and simplified for us. This is the basic of how we can design and how we can work with the forms. So that is the forms validations and how to deal with them in Angular. These are all the basic things related to forms. So two forms are there: template driven forms, template driven forms, and reactive forms. Now with this we complete all the concept that is required for you. Actually, you people have to learn web services in Java. Means in the backend you have to learn web services, and when you learn web services and APIs, there they will teach you again Angular integration, 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 integration with Java. They will show you the integration with Java, how the Angular integration with Java works, API works, and there you will learn state management. State management, for that they can use management, they can use any tool like Redux and all, because you cannot learn here until or unless you know APIs first. You should know state management, you should know APIs, you should know services. Then with those integrations, you are going to learn these concepts. So when you are learning web services in your Java, there they will show you how to integrate with the APIs, how to manage the state management and Redux like things in your server side and client side technologies. State management, everything happens through that. Redux is not mandatory, but people use Redux when they use state management in the back end and front end. You will learn about state management techniques, then you will understand about that. And once you finish everything, even in your Java also, means in your Java full stack, you learned complete integration. Finally, I will take, after your Java APIs, I will take one session where I will show you live deployment. Why live deployment means, so how to deploy on cloud servers and make our project work on live environment. Actually, if you will learn in GitHub and all, so but you are in full stack, they will teach you about how to deal with GitHub and deploy on GitHub or any other cloud servers we have to learn. These two things you will learn with the integration of your Java. So these two topics are learned with the integration of your Java with your APIs and microservices and all. And that will be the complete scenario of integration of end to end. So whatever in the front end you need to know in Angular, that I already given everything. So with this, we complete all the concept of front end Angular. API integrations, that your Java API people will take care about that and show you how they are done with your Angular technologies. Okay. Whatever you need to know in Angular in the front end based, everything we have discussed about that. That is what actually, according to your content curriculum, we need to learn, right? Next, now the next session onwards, you will carry forward with your bootstrap concepts and other topics. With this, we complete all the concepts, right? And I will upload all the notes related to these topics and whatever required for our content. Okay, from Monday onwards, you will have sessions on bootstrap and you will continue with your other development process. Okay. And after you learn your APIs, I will come back one more time and I will just give you integration and live deployment related options if they haven't shown there. Obviously they will show there. If they haven't shown, I will show you here. Okay, right. So with this we complete. I will upload all the examples to you. Okay, no? Right. Yes, Srivatsav.
So, I just want to ask, sir, how to send a post request
That
to
is what I said. Na, you will
API?
learn in APIs. Huh? You haven't learned APIs, na, right? You
Oh,
haven't learned any APIs, right? Web
no.
services. Huh? That is where you will learn post, put, delete, working with APIs. That API integrations, your Java people will teach you. Okay, na?
Okay, sir.
Ah. Yes, Achyut.
So from Monday, no class for Angular.
For
You going to
from,
teach Bootstrap?
no. So depends. Somebody else may take care about this. Huh?
Same time, huh?
Same time. Huh?
Okay.